There's a story about a fellow war correspondent who found himself in Vietnam covering the war in January 1968, which was the time of Tet and the Great Tet Battle, where the North Vietnamese Army and the local Viet Cong overran all parts of South Vietnam into the cities and created quite a lot of havoc. And that's a story that I'm going to tell in a little moment because I was there and I was trapped in Nha Trang, which is a coastal town, beautiful place, in the at the time of Tet. Tell that story in a sec, but I'm going to tell about this war correspondent guy who many years later set out to do a story or a book or a something or other on the Battle at Hue, H-U-E, which was a very historical, very ancient town in the northern part of South Vietnam, which was a pitched battle, really a vicious battle that went on better part of 3 weeks, maybe 3+ weeks, and was anyway, he wanted to learn more about it because he had not been in Hue, at least according to his recollection. So he set out to find people who were. And soon enough, he found that some archive somewhere had tapes and notes and all kinds of stuff by a war correspondent who had been embedded with then and had gone through the entire Hue battle and who had thoroughly documented it. So he went off to see to see these documents with the intent of going and finding the guy who did these things if he was still alive. And when he got there and he looked at the stuff, and he found out that war correspondent and fellow in notes and so forth, he did know. He knew him very well because it was him. And he had no recollection of those 3.5 weeks in Hue and during that battle. And so the account that he subsequently, I believe, did was based on the notes that he read of his own contemporaneous that he set down, but he didn't. It didn't jar any memories loose. Now, on the night of January 30th, I was in Hue. Yeah, sorry, I was in Nha Trang, and at that time I was head of intelligence for TWO Corps, which psychological operations intelligence for TWO Corps. Been in that role for a few months. And attending the briefings, both for the Special Forces. 5th Special Forces was in Nha Trang. I'd go down to their briefing. I knew the Special Warfare guys because I'd been back at Bragg. Almost was a Special Forces guy myself. If I had gone a little further than I did, I might have been involved in Special Forces, which thank God I wasn't. And also the Army briefings on so I was aware of these things. And a few days before Tet, I got a top secret, I was sent a top secret memo out of Saigon, and to go get top secret stuff, I had to get a couple of my guys with guns, and we'd go over, meet the plane, they'd guard me, and I'd take it back to the intelligence office there, which was secure area, and I'd open it up. And then when I did, I'm going to declassify this for you. Top secret document that was so important. Read, increased enemy activity may be expected shortly before, during, or following Tet. Great cover your ass, but also accurate. We did have increased enemy activity. In fact, they almost broke us up and everybody had to run for the coast to live. My neighborhood was heavily bombed. People died around us, and I have no recollection except for one or two specifics of what happened during those 2 or 3 days in the train. Except that, like this other fellow who wrote down, I wrote very extensively about Tet at the time, and what I know about it, I largely know from my own notes, which now are in the archives at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, with the library, SWEM library, has all of that stuff. What happened was we came back to the villa. We knew that they set off a lot of fireworks to celebrate Tet. Came back to the villa that afternoon, and the guy who guards our villa for us was gone. And you could ascribe that to being, oh, well, he's off for Tet, home with the family, the wife, the kids, whatever. But in retrospect, it wasn't that. He knew something was going to happen that night. He knew it was going to happen either in our neighborhood or adjacent to it, and both were accurate. And so he was warned off, and I never had any problem with that at all. So anyway, a lot of fireworks. Okay, 9, 10 o'clock, got dark, and then fireworks gave way to gunfire, and I certainly was familiar with that. I'd been out with the 2nd and the 7th of the 1st Admirable Cav and 101st, and I knew what that sound was, and I knew that it was a little too close, and that the war had broken out in our front and back and adjacent yards. And soon enough, the Air Force was strafing and bombing, dropping flares and lighting up the sky in this sort of eerie orange, and this would go on all night. After the Air Force started firing rockets through our neighborhood, I was terrified. I had been in bed, and I rolled off onto the floor, onto a tile floor. I lived in the back of our villa at 8 Malin Street on the 2nd floor, and rolled up onto the floor, onto a tile floor, and I pulled the mattress down over me, and I'm laying there in a developing pool of sweat. And as I laid there for a while, I began to become aware that I was very quietly hearing a click, 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 click of my fingernails on the tile, and a serenity and calmness came over me. And because I said to myself, you're not going to survive this, and laying under a mattress is not going to save you. So there's a great show going on outside, and you're in your final seconds, minutes, or hours of your life, so you may as well go out and have a look. And I did. I went out. There was a little connecting porch between the back of the house where I was and the front of the house. And then I climbed up on the roof, and gradually the other 5 officers in our villa also joined me up on the roof, because we were all dead men walking. Didn't really matter. And I photographed that stuff as well. I recall going back to the following morning. We lived, obviously, and I went back out through Fukai Circle, I think it was called, and there I was in the middle of a firefight that had just ended, and this is where I have a photograph of what I saw in terms of the carnage. And I was told to go on down a block, pull into the Grand Hotel, and be safe. Instead, I thought, God, I don't want to be stuck here. So I went on down 5 miles, ran down Beach Road, and went on into where my offices were, which was at Camp McDermott, now long since really rebuilt up with houses and hooches and one thing and another, adjacent to the airport, which itself is now closed, and so on. And that's where I stayed. And what happened in the next days, I'm not really clear about. But it's in my notes, and it's there. And the important thing is we survived. I and another officer and probably a couple of us went back a day or so later, and we like we were John Wayne Commandos or something. We went in and retook the Mei Lin. There wasn't anybody in it, but we came in the side door armed and ready to encounter whatever we encountered. And retook the villa, and there wasn't anybody in it. Nobody had been in it. They took the rail yards about a block or two from where our villa was in Mei Lin, and they overran that, and they were seemingly going to overrun our neighborhood, but eventually that didn't happen. And so that was a turning point in my life, because at one point I had what I thought were a couple of Viet Cong in my sights while I was guarding 8 Mei Lin, and my other officers were above me, and they were coming towards me and getting very close. And I had them in my sights, and I did not pull the trigger. I didn't want to kill anybody, and if you're going to kill me, well, I didn't care to live with the. This all sounds kind of noble, but it's true. It is true. And but I also knew that up above me, guys also had their guns trained on these people, and so I let them walk up and walk past me. And it was a woman, and behind her, she had her 2 children. And I could just as easily have killed her, and the guys in the villa could as easily have killed her and the children, but we didn't. When I would fly later on, I handled 3 weapons while I was in Vietnam. One was the M16, which I went to Vietnam with, probably 4, because I got an AR-15 or an M15, whatever it was. And then I was issued a pistol, a .45 pistol, which developed by Teddy Roosevelt in the early part of the 20th century, and you could drop an elephant with it. What you couldn't do is, if you're 10 feet away from somebody, you're probably not going to hit them because of the weight of the weapon and how you're and the recoils. But at a .45, I would fly with that, with the thought that if I go down, I've got a weapon and I can hunt and I can kill somebody. Nonsense. And but then also for the villa, later on to defend the villa, we had this incredibly crazy, it's called a grease gun, and I forget what it is, but it's an automatic .45 weapon. And when you fire this thing, when you start to fire, it goes like this. I mean, so you have to hold it down. So we had a grease gun. I think I fired that once, and it was good enough that if we wanted to, I guess we could have blown a hole in the wall in our own villa and so on. So this is merely a kind of a short retake of Tet. When, at least one night, we had gone back with some other officers from our unit who lived in a different villa, and the thought was we would all stay on Mei Lin. But once we got there, these guys, I got more beer over at the other place, and so they went on over there. And that night at that villa, the Viet Cong wound up in the backyard. They wound up in a firefight with them, really heavy. None of them were injured, none of them died, but only for the grace of God did that not happen. Now, we had some amusing, happy, crazy war stories. I mean, everything is that Joseph Miller shared with you in Catch 22. You run into these things, and we're going to make another podcast probably fairly soon and tell you about flying in Vietnam, which I did fly. I'm not a pilot, but they trained you to be a pilot so you could survive. And we'll tell those stories and some other stories about about our unit and about those times in Vietnam. But we'll save those for another time. And I probably have a lot more about Tet and the night of January 30th, 1968. But there's no reason to go into that. The only other thing to say about it is that was the last time I was afraid. We had other times and other instances where a lot of mischief was going on around us. Once you sat on the roof in the middle of a firefight and being strafed by the Air Force. When I was down in Saigon much later on, and the 122 rockets would come lobbing into the city, and which, by the way, 122 sounded like a piece of 4x cardboard falling into dust. Whoomp, kaboom. You go, that's irritated, waking me up, and you go, sit. But that was later, and I also, came in from Tan Son Nhut one night, I shouldn't have, came in late, flying in from somewhere, and I didn't want to stay out of Tan Son Nhut, so I made the duty officer down at the unit down in Saigon, down at the rail yard, send out a couple of guys to get me in. That was horribly irresponsible, run them through Saigon in the middle of the night. Irresponsible for them, irresponsible for me, but you get to a point where you just live in the moment, and there may not be another moment next. It could be the last seconds of your life. And by the way, that's a very comfortable way to live, and you adjust to that, or some don't, but I did. I find it very comfortable. And so coming back to the United States afterwards, which is kind of a bit more persnickety world, and where your shoes need to be polished and your hair needs to be cut, and that was a challenge for an awful lot of vets to adjust to, including me, because I've become very comfortable after almost 2 years in Vietnam, living in the moment. More later. We'll tell some more war stories sometime soon.